Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 27th SF Indie Fest. The festival is taking place February 6th through 18th at the historic Roxy Theater in San Francisco, as well as virtually in your computer screens. So, a huge thank you for our audience for tuning in, and hello to our amazing filmmakers from our Four Stories Shorts program. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Marie Flores. I curate the shorts programs here at SF Indie Fest, and I'm so excited to introduce these filmmakers. I would love to just kick it off with Noah. Hi, Noah. If you could tell us what your name is, which film you're here with, and what your role was, and what the genesis of this project was for you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Noah Weber. So I am here with Pigs Fly and God's Cry, of which I was the director and composer and some other things, but director and composer, that's good enough for now. So the genesis of this project was, it all kind of started with a conversation with a friend. We were both somewhat melancholy about, we like to talk about high-minded stuff, mostly because we're drinking. That's what one does. So we're sort of melancholy about the status of truth, the concept of truth, which we felt is a very useful tool, and we feel it's sort of been dragged in the mud and stamped around and sort of thrown out like a kid throws out like a mutilated Barbie doll. So we were both sort of conversing, and he was talking about how the problem is there's just so much information, what you typically might expect, that there's so much information out there, so many facts being purported, and you just have no way to tell which one's true, which one's false. I had an objection with that. I had a feeling that, I don't know, I felt like those issues were very important, but I felt like truth truth wasn't really relevant to those issues. And he looked at me with a gaping mouth, and I tried to explain my objections, and I had a great difficulty expressing my objections in words. So I told him to stay there, right at that spot, and I sort of disappeared for 8, 9 months, and sort of made this movie as a way of working through these issues myself, sort of a intellectual therapy, so to speak, to create something that I felt elicits a feeling that expresses the current landscape with respect to these problems. So 8 or 9 months later, I came back to my friend. He's in the same exact location. And I fear it ended up being somewhat a failure, because he looked at me with the same gaping mouth, and he asked me to explain the movie, which I had a great difficulty doing, explaining it, expressing it in words. So I fear it might end up being a infinite regress of failures of communication, which I feel that's okay, because I think that's kind of at the heart of the issue, at the issue, and I feel like that's expressed in the movie quite well. So that's sort of the whole circle about the movie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noah. Hi, Josh Park. I'd love to have you introduce yourself and tell us what you did on the film and why did you make it?
Yeah, my name's Josh Park. I am the writer-director of Premium Casket. Why did I make it? Because I had to make something for my thesis program at SF State. But more than that, it was, yeah, hell yeah. Um, but it was, I used to work at a cemetery office. So, I mean, everyone who's watching this has seen the film. I essentially had the job the main character had in the film, and honestly, like real life was a lot crazier than the film sort of depicts. So that was kind of the genesis of it. Actually, a very specific moment was me like putting the flowers up with a long pole in the hallway. Um, in the niches. So you have to like take a big long pole and just like swoop up flowers to the top row. And I was like, I don't think I've seen this represented like visually before. I'm gonna keep that. And so that's kind of where it started.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Jeremiah. Welcome. Sorry, I
Thank
can
you.
vamp. Hey, everyone, don't look right here quite yet. All right, you swallowed, you're good.
Yeah, I'm I'm Jeremiah Zaire. So this project started 8 years ago.
Oh, tell us which film you're here with and what
Oh
you
yes,
did.
oh yes. So I so I wrote and directed and produced. I also composed on this project, did the graphics. I wore a lot of hats on this. So the project Gunner's Lament started as a project that me and my filmmaking friend Kalen Albert, who is my cinematographer, and we just wanted to execute a project before his move to Salt Lake City, Utah. And yeah, and he was pursuing commercial work, and but we wanted to do a passion project, before his move. So we executed the script. This was like within a 3-week span. We wrote the script, we got the crew together, we basically had everything that we needed, and things came together. My very good friend Kevin Croak, he was, like kind of integral to the whole thing. He always loved working on kind of noir, mobster type films, and I thought, well, like I'd like to give him, I just wanted to see him in a, just a different type of role. But ironically enough, it was, and I did a majority of the writing, but the most pivotal thing that Kalen added to that process was just switching around the roles. Originally, I had Kevin in place as he was going to be the mob boss, and then there was going to be a younger guy coming into the office, and that was kind of the catalyst. It's kind of a traditional noir kind of setup, but just swapping the roles around and having it be an older gentleman who's, coming to face with, this new line of like who's running the mob, and him basically wanting to step away from it, and realizing that it's not as easy as that. Although I think he knows it deep within himself. But anyway, I'm getting off on the reeds here. I apologize.
Well, good job. I'll have some follow-up questions about that in a
Awesome.
moment. But thanks so much
Awesome.
for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Hi, Josh Lehman. Can you please introduce yourself? Tell us your role and what film you're here with.
Yeah, my name is Josh.
And why you
Lehman.
made your movie?
Sure. My name is Josh Lehman. I am the writer, director, and actor, a producer of The Garden. And let's see, the spark. Well, I wrote this way back in like 2012, I think was the first draft. And at the time, The Secret was a very popular book, and The Power of Positive Thinking was had maybe reached a point where it had sort of jumped the shark in my estimation. And it's something that had kind of started as like a pretty simple positive self-talk movement sort of thing, kind of metastasized into something where like maybe if you had cancer, you weren't thinking good enough thoughts. So I think my annoyance with that sort of development is probably the original spark. I'd seen that there was, it had sort of developed into this sort of facile rejection of the problem of evil and pain, and become sort of a platform from which to reject other people in their pain and grief. So that's probably where it started. I think the husband exhibits that relentless optimism the most. And from there, it just sort of developed into something more general about people's difficulties holding space for others, especially in their pain and grief.
That's beautiful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Mackenzie. Can you introduce yourself and your film role and what made you get involved with the project?
Sure. My name is Mackenzie Mathis. I was a cinematographer on The Garden. Before The Garden, Josh and I collaborated on his film before that, which is a very different kind of film. And The Garden sounded really interesting to me because it was so different from the previous project. The one we did before was very quick and dirty, a lot longer, a lot of handheld, a lot of very sort of flowy camera work and stuff like that. And then The Garden, as it was presented to me anyway, had a lot of visual references to like Renaissance paintings and these sort of tableaus that really seemed to have a lot of potential visually. And so, yeah, I was on board from the start, just for the, the story, the actors, the location, of course, the director. And yeah, I usually just do what I'm told. So I show up when I'm asked to show up, and we just make stuff happen as best we can.
As every great cinematographer should. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
I would love to jump back over to Noah. Noah, let's talk about your use of comedic timing in your film. Like, there's almost something that feels drawn out or at times embarrassing when you're watching it, where you're like, oh my gosh, like watching these people react to kind of the absurdity within the story. You really nail this sense of like comedy, but in the most awkward of ways. Can you kind of talk about your approach
Yeah,
to that
yeah.
within the film?
Yeah, so I felt my approach to the film, I think me and Mark, the DP on the project, we both called it rational irrationality or irrational rationality, where everybody in the film in some sense has their own sort of logic that they feel like they understand. But which is in some sense in some sense it's incomprehensible to everybody else, and they don't really even understand it. And I think one of the goals with the project was sort of to take all these different sorts of characters with different systems of thinking and have them just try to communicate, manipulate each other, try to achieve their goals and utterly fail at the end at reaching any sort of basic common communication or common ground. And yeah, I feel like naturally the natural consequence of that is that these sort of absurd conversations which achieve their goals but don't really. They're contradictory conversations because simultaneously they make sense and they don't make sense. And I feel like
I'll just
yes.
add, I think that this is really highlighted by using the documentary format within that,
Yeah.
right? Because when you think about documentary, you think about this like absolute truth,
Yes.
essentially. And so your visual style really plays into that comedy.
Yes, and with regards to that, I've heard some people have said it's a mockumentary. It's not really a mockumentary. It's more of it's a mix of all sorts of different movies in the sense that you never actually know whose viewpoint you are looking at. At the beginning, it's seems like a straightforward documentary, but then the camera afterwards it seems to have a mind of its own. Then it seems to belong to Herman Hollerith, then it seems to belong to Judy Hollerith, and it's all these viewpoints are sort of mixed up like sugar mixed up in water to make something that is more than the sum of its parts, something that is completely new. And I think having that new, I don't know, that confusion in there was sort of integral to the tone, to expressing what we wanted to express.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Hi, Josh Park. Can we talk about the fact that you hit the film student lottery with your location? Like,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
your classmates must have been so angry, because what an incredible space to get to explore storytelling.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked about that because
I have an actual question, but I wanted to talk about this for a second first.
yeah, oh my gosh, we definitely did hit the lottery. This is Mount Tam Cemetery and Funeral Home, and they were, shout out to them, they were the sweetest people ever. They were actually the first location on our scout, and they were immediately so accommodating. And we saw a bunch of other locations, and we were just like, nobody was as accommodating or as open to it, and it was just like, okay, let's
So
go for
rad.
it.
Like, what a
Yeah,
great space. Okay, actual question though.
yeah.
What I really appreciate about your film is this balance, because I feel like you're treating the space for grief incredibly respectfully, but you're also depicting like people undermining each other within this environment. So can you just talk about your approach to this story, even like when you think about somebody who's supposed to be there for those that are in grief, you're not really thinking about coworkers backstabbing or conniving. So can you just talk a little bit more about that thread and how you executed that within your film?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think that element came from, it was a thing I didn't I think about very consciously, because I worked in that environment, and your attitude towards those spaces really changes, where it goes from a really sacred hollow space, and it remains that way, but then you have the market and the job on top of it. And it's a really strange combo of things. So I honestly think that just came from deriving how it felt to like be privy to those conversations, and just sort of like translating that to um, yeah, a short film. And um, yeah, but I think there is something, but I think weirdly, like something profound comes out of that, because it's like, oh, we all do live under these like market strictures, and everything is relatively like commercialized or bought and sold. So then, yeah, this combo I think produces um, a sort of like strange sensation of what it feels like to live under these systems, I think. So
There's
yeah,
like the
maybe that's it.
human, but then there's the like capitalistic machine and how they
Yeah.
kind of like get mulched up in the blender.
Absolutely. And then like the cemetery space um is kind of a really, really distilled, weird part of that. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much. Jeremiah, I would love to talk to you about your use, kind of your mixture of classic noir tropes and modernity, because what really struck me is that it felt very seamless. And it might just be this thing where you like, you're like, oh, well, it's just easier to put in the cell phone or whatever. But I feel like you really make this kind of blending of worlds that comes across really, really beautifully, where you have this, this person that's aging out of their profession, that you would expect to see like existing in the 40s, but this is like very squarely told within modern time. So can you talk about that from a story perspective and also from the visual language of filmmaking?
Yeah, sure. I suppose I should say, at least in terms of like the themes and maybe like that old school quality kind of melding into the modern filmmaking. I grew up watching a lot of classic films, and that was a lot of what my parents watched, and that definitely shaped a lot of at least my I guess my I like how I communicate film, or how I learn to communicate with film. And I think, at least in terms of like the classic trope, the noir, I have always been drawn to the stark contrast of black and white, the black and white, the classic films, like the old Humphrey Bogart films. Those are really, really inspiring to me. Just a lot of like the third man. That's great. I love that. Um, and I suppose at least in terms of like melding a lot of these themes and the idea of like this, this old mob hitman trying to move on with his life. It definitely it was to be perfectly honest, like the script, it was really just something that we were both me and Keelan were inspired by at the time. And I apologize, I'm not. I feel like I'm not explaining this as well as I could be. Could I?
No, it totally makes sense. And it's also been a minute. So like you're doing great. Keep
Thank
going.
you. All
Go,
right, awesome.
Jeremiah.
Oh yeah, thank you. Let's see. So like, oh yeah, just at least I can definitely say uh, the changes that we've seen in seeing the old guard is shifting as we move along. And I've been seeing, I mean, there's been a lot of these types of shifts, especially recently. There's some major shifts, and it's scary. And I think that at least a lot of these themes, like I spent a lot of time sitting with it, and a lot of times away from it because of a lot of the circumstances that came to be in the making of the film. The passing of Kevin in particular was especially hard right at the end of 2020. I moved out to California at the end of 2017, and that was shortly after I completed wrapping the film. So it was a lot of change for myself, and I think that at least in terms of like the themes in the film and that those kind of correlated in kind of like a beautiful way. I did not plan any of that. That was all, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these, at least the clips that I edited together and the way that I tried to convey everything, I think it, that definitely came from what I was experiencing, and it's a lot to explain. That's why I feel like it's hard
No,
to.
I get it. I get it. I will add, in Josh Lehman's film as well, there is a glimpse of one of our close friends who is also passed. And there's something very strange and elastic, but also so distant about filmmaking, right? Because when we start these journeys, they're just random ideas, usually conceived of us like riffing with our friends. And then we scrape together graham crackers and fruit snacks and cameras and more buddies and random locations. And we drag everyone to some random place and say, we're going to do this strange art. And then at the end of the day, you're left with a hard drive and the need to finish it up. And sometimes that takes as long as it needs to. And you don't understand that you've just captured a time capsule. And it's not just what is going to be in that final cut. It's that feeling of working with your friends and family and telling this story that's incredibly impactful. And I think that really comes across in your film. So Jeremiah, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much.
Josh Lehman, hi, buddy.
Hi.
I would love to I'm just gonna say that there's something so evocative about the image that we're left with when we're done watching your film. And I would kind of love to start there and work backwards. I guess throughout your storytelling, did you know, and I'm going to bring Mackenzie into this conversation too. Did you know that that's where you wanted to end within your story? And how was that decision made from a cinematographical perspective, and how to capture that and execute it? So Mac, I think I'm just going to start with you actually. Josh, you can hold on. What was your conversation with Josh Lehman to get started? Did you always know that you were going to land on that kind of shot of defiance?
Wow. Well, I should start by saying we filmed this a long time ago. And so some of the memories are a little bit hazy.
Just make it up.
But
It's okay. They don't know the difference at home.
true. As I recall, we knew that we were going to be in that location, and that location is pretty familiar to both of us because we both grew up in that area. And so I remember looking at a lot of Impressionist paintings, Renaissance paintings to get the feel of this sort of light and color. And for me, one of the hardest things about as you said, you kind of, and you end up with a hard drive at the end of it. And, with such a long post-production process, we ended up doing the color twice on film. And the first time, I was really trying to capture the natural beauty of the location and to really show that off, But then later, it didn't quite feel right. It kind of felt a little too bright and happy in a way. So in the end, we ended up settling on a more muted and a more desaturated and stark kind of look, which at first felt really wrong for that location. But at the end of the day, I feel like it matched the story a lot better. And so just to kind of circle back around to your question, I feel like it was a constantly evolving process about the look because, you know, we worked with a very small crew. We even had to do 2 stints of shooting that were months apart. And so, you know, there was a lot of work to kind of imbue a little bit of consistency in the images. I'm sure there was a lot of work going on to, you know, make sure that the story and the acting was consistent as well. So it was kind of feeling it out in a way. I think we did as much planning as we could up front, but at the end of the day, you know, we were shooting a lot of exteriors. So we kind of just had to work with what the universe gave us. And then crafting this wholly separate kind of more foreboding atmosphere in the bar scene. That was a lot of fun, just creating that contrast between those two spaces. I don't know if I answered your question very well. I'm sorry if I didn't, but
No, I think that touches upon it. I'll come back to the final scene with you, Josh Lehman. In terms of your storytelling, did you always know that that's where you wanted to land and were going to land? And how are we tracking your main female actresses, whose name is Gina, and she's the best. Shout out to Gina. Kind of arc through this, because what I find really striking is that, first of all, she's an amazing performer, but she's almost like this has this sense of silent defiance that I think can ebb and flow throughout the story. But we're always very conscious of her looking and watching and seemingly judging. So if you can talk about that through like the story arc, but also your approach of visual storytelling.
Yeah, I think for her character, it was always a study in contrast because I had, you know, there's such fumbling and failure to sort of face the moment on the part of her husband. And I see her reaction of kind of silent defiance as fairly apt to the situation. And I did always know that I didn't want to make the heroics huge or anything like that. I wanted something very small but effective, which ended up being a simple step towards the problem. But it's hopefully provides that study in contrast after watching everything that came before it. And as far as grounding it in her, that was part of the plan, but it also developed in the edit even more. I just kept coming back to her face and wanting to see how I do love her face. Full disclosure, I ended up marrying Gina. But yeah, I wanted to see how everything was landing on her and keep checking back in with her, especially to build towards that last moment.
That's beautiful. Well, my friends, that's all the time we have for our Q&A today. I'm so glad to have had the chance to share your films with our audience. Audience, good job. Thank you for giving us your money and attention. And please continue to support Bay Area independent cinema. And thank you again so much, filmmakers, for making these amazing works. We're so excited to share them with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.